The words hung in the air between us, not like a disagreement, but like a verdict. Just let it go. He said it with a sigh, the kind one might reserve for a child's persistent tantrum, as if the very concept of financial fairness was an inconvenient annoyance to his peace. My own breath caught a tiny, trapped bird in my chest. In that moment, looking at his perfectly composed face, the years of carefully constructed normalcy fractured, revealing the rot beneath. For so long, I had been the dutiful wife, the quiet homemaker, the one who managed the household with a smile and never questioned the flow of money. We had a comfortable life, or so I believed, built on shared dreams and mutual trust. I handled the bills, the mortgage, the retirement contributions, all while he maintained an air of effortless provider, a benevolent king of our domestic castle. But beneath the surface of shared accounts and joint decisions, a slow, insidious erosion had been taking place, a silent siphoning that I was only just beginning to comprehend. It wasn't a sudden revelation. It was a slow dawning, like the first hint of dawn on a perpetually overcast day. There were small things, easily dismissed at first. A consistent underestimation of household expenses that always seemed to fall to my savings, not his. The way he'd forget to contribute his agreed-upon share for the renovations we'd planned together, only to have me cover the difference with my inherited trust fund money I'd specifically earmarked for emergencies. He'd always have a perfectly plausible excuse, a surprise business expense, an unexpected tax bill, a temporary cash flow issue. And I, ever the optimist, ever the believer in our partnership, would nod, accept it, and dip into my own funds, telling myself it was just a blip, a temporary imbalance. There was the time my grandmother passed, leaving me a modest but significant sum. I told him, excitedly, about setting up a separate, untouchable investment account for it, just for our future. He'd agreed, his eyes shining with feigned shared excitement. But when a pressing investment opportunity arose, one that promised guaranteed returns that never quite materialized, he gently persuaded me to liquidate a portion of that very fund. The money, of course, vanished into whatever black hole his finances seemed to perpetually reside in, leaving me with a vague explanation and a hollow ache. He'd always frame it as a joint venture, a risk we were taking together, but the reality was, it was always my capital, my security, being gambled away with his absent-minded approval. The quietest betrayals are often the most profound. I remember the meticulously planned family vacation, a trip to the coast we'd talked about for years. We'd saved for it diligently, or so I thought. 2 weeks before departure, he'd casually mentioned a slight shortfall. He needed a few $1,000s more to secure the perfect beachfront villa. My heart sank, but again, I didn't challenge. I pulled from my savings, the same savings that were supposed to supplement our emergency fund. When we got there, the villa was a cramped, 2-bedroom apartment, a far cry from the panoramic ocean views promised. He brushed it off with a laugh, claiming the real estate agent had oversold it. But the unease had begun to bloom, a tiny seed of suspicion in the fertile ground of my unquestioning love. Each instance, a small chip at the foundation, a subtle redirection of resources that always benefited him, always left me scrambling. He operated with an almost childlike innocence, a performance so convincing that for years, I blamed myself for being too cautious, too worried, too unadventurous. Then came the conversation that ignited the slow burn into a controlled inferno. It was a Tuesday evening. The air was thick with the scent of roasting chicken, a comforting domestic aroma that felt like a cruel mockery. We were sitting at the dining table, the remnants of our meal between us. I'd been reviewing our joint account statements, a routine I'd kept up for years, trying to reconcile some lingering discrepancies that had begun to gnaw at me. I'd found them, those discrepancies, not in isolated incidents, but in a pattern, a consistent, almost artistic depletion of my personal funds, funneled into accounts he claimed were for household investments or future growth. My hands trembled slightly as I laid the printouts out. "Honey," I began, my voice surprisingly steady, "we need to talk about this. These numbers, they don't add up." I pointed to a series of transfers, each one a significant sum, all originating from my discretionary income, my fund money account, and disappearing into his shadowy investment portfolios. His reaction was not surprise or concern, but a weary annoyance. He leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his tone dismissive. "It's all part of our fina. Ences, isn't it? We're a team." I pressed on, my voice rising with a dawning horror. "But these are transfers from account to yours. And there's no corresponding investment. It's just gone. Over the last 6 years, there are hundreds of thousands of dollars missing from my savings, from the money I'd set aside for myself, and it's all been moved into your private accounts, with no explanation, no visible return." He sighed, a long, drawn-out sound that vibrated with a manufactured weariness. He reached across the table, his hand hovering just above the papers, not touching them. "Look," he said, his voice softening into that patronizing tone he reserved for my concerns, "it's complicated business. You wouldn't understand." He then delivered the line that would echo in my mind for weeks, the nail in the coffin of our shared life. "Just let it go. It's not worth the stress. Let it go." The phrase was a dismissal, a judgment, a complete negation of my right to understand, my right to security, my right to financial autonomy. In that instant, the warmth of the kitchen, the smell of the food, the very air I breathed felt cold and sterile. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not the man I loved, but a stranger. The man I'd built a life with was a meticulous manipulator, and my silence, my trust, had been his greatest asset. The realization didn't bring tears. It brought a chilling clarity. The rot was deep, pervasive, and I was complicit by my ignorance. The next few days were a blur of quiet calculation. I didn't confront him further, didn't engage in the futile dance of accusation and denial. Instead, I began to pull on threads. I contacted the lawyer who had handled my grandmother's estate, a woman I trusted implicitly. I requested all documentation pertaining to my inheritance, including the trust account he had so easily persuaded me to dip into. Then, I reached out to a forensic accountant. I didn't tell him I was doing it. I worked during the day, and in the evenings, I meticulously gathered every bank statement, every credit card bill, every financial document I could find, dating back not 6 years, but 10. I pieced together the narrative he had so carefully hidden. It was a tapestry of deceit, woven with fabricated expenses, inflated invoices, and investments that never existed. He had systematically diverted my income, my inheritance, and even funds I'd set aside for our children's college, into offshore accounts and shell corporations that bore his name, or names I didn't recognize. The accountant confirmed my worst fears. It wasn't just about borrowing or investing. It was outright theft, disguised as partnership. The quiet execution began on a Thursday. I waited until he left for his usual golf game, the one he played religiously every Thursday afternoon. I waited until his car disappeared down the street. Then, I walked to the study, the room he considered his sanctuary. I opened his desk drawer, the one he always kept locked. I didn't have the key. But I did have the number of a highly reputable locksmith, someone I'd vetted weeks ago. He arrived within the hour, discreet and efficient. While the locksmith worked, I meticulously photographed every document within the desk, every ledger, every private bank statement. When he finished, I secured the drawer, leaving it locked, but now, I held the key. My next step was to visit the bank, our primary joint account. I met with the branch manager, a woman I'd known for years. I presented her with a certified copy of the forensic accountant's report, a document that laid bare the extent of his manipulation. I also presented her with a notarized affidavit, detailing my intent to dissolve our joint accounts and sever all financial ties. She was professional, sympathetic, and efficient. By the time he returned home, our joint accounts were frozen, his access revoked. He found a single envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside, a copy of the forensic accountant's report, a copy of my affidavit, and a single, concise letter from my lawyer, informing him that I was initiating divorce proceedings and that all assets would be subject to legal division, based on the evidence of his financial malfeasance. The aftermath was a symphony of his unraveling. His initial reaction was disbelief, followed by a furious denial. Texts flooded my phone, a desperate barrage of accusations, pleas, and thinly veiled threats. "You can't do this. This is insane. You're ruining everything. His family, predictably, became his flying monkeys. My mother-in-law called, her voice trembling with indignation, demanding to know what I was thinking, accusing me of being greedy and ungrateful. His sister sent a string of increasingly unhinged messages, painting me as a gold digger who had waited for the opportune moment to strike. But I didn't respond. I had my lawyer handle all communication. His golf buddies, the ones he boasted to about his supposed business acumen, began to avoid him, whispers following him on the greens. The investments he had so carefully hidden, the ones that were actually my money, began to surface in legal discovery. His carefully constructed facade of a successful businessman crumbled when presented with irrefutable proof of his fraud. The social consequences were immediate and brutal. Friends distanced themselves, uncomfortable with the unfolding drama and the undeniable evidence of his dishonesty. The pride he had worn so effortlessly was replaced by a deep, gnawing shame. I watched, from a detached and quiet distance, as his world imploded. He was no longer the benevolent provider, he was a convicted manipulator, his reputation in tatters, his financial future uncertain, all because he thought he could get away with it. He had told me to let it go, to dismiss his deceit as insignificant. But I had chosen to remember, to gather, to expose. And in the silent, cold execution of that truth, I found a profound and quiet justice. The satisfaction wasn't in his pain, but in the restoration of balance, in the undeniable reality that his house of cards, built on my trust and his manipulation, had finally, irrevocably, fallen.